Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, so it is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions and talk about writing, craft, art, the writing life, um, and you can ask me questions in the comments. Always happy to answer your questions, and you can also always send me questions on the through my website janetfitchwrites.com. So we have some questions today, but I thought I'd first talk about I'm this is the after Christmas edition, so I am reading. I got all these wonderful books and writing gifts and stuff that I have to share for a moment just because I can't stand it. Also, a poetry book that I've got four poems in, an anthology. Peggy Dobreer, who is a Los Angeles poet, does a morning meditation and free write group called Slow Lightning. And she's been running it since we were waiting for the inauguration, that it just went on week after week and everybody was jumping out of their skin. So she decided to host a morning meditation and free write, prompted write, guided meditation and prompted write every weekday morning. And she's just kept it going. And if you're interested, you can write to her at Ad Hoc Inc. So Ad Hoc, ADHOCINK, at yahoo.com. So she's still doing it, and we have written hundreds of poems. Get a poem a day for every weekday. And she has there was enough poetry that being generated. She was very excited about it, and they pulled an anthology of people who have been working with Peggy, either through the Slow Lightning group or she does overnight writes, which are really interesting. I've done that, and so she's pulled the poems together. They're all pandemic era, Trump era, trauma era, are interesting times and themes running through them, and it's come out. So I'm sure this is backwards in your feed. Sorry about that. But Slow Lightning, impractical poetry, and it's got I'd say there are at least 20-25 contributors, and I have four poems in here. I'm not a poet, and I'd say half of the people who take part in Peggy's Slow Lightning group are not poets. They're writers of other sorts, and sometimes they're just psychotherapists or teachers or whatever. So she offers it from 8:30 in the morning to 9:15 Pacific time. So there are people from the East who come in the middle of the day. And so that's available through Peggy, Peggy Dobreer, Dobreer, or on Amazon. Have to say it. But anyway, I got four poems published, so that was very exciting. Hey, Lewis, I got your question today. The other things, Christmassy items, so that's obviously it was a fabulous Christmas present to get that. Another thing that the poet Taylor Mawley often drops in on that Slow Lightning group. He's in New York, in Brooklyn, and he has something called metaphor dice, which are very cool if you want to try writing some poetry. There are these dice like this, where you roll. Let's see, the dice are like this. So you get 12 dice in the box, and they're subject, verb, object. And you roll them and you get a metaphor. So I rolled them this morning just to see what I got. And I got midnight, the truth, and wedding gown. So, I could say the truth is a midnight wedding gown. That's very poetic. But I kind of like, at midnight, the truth is a wedding gown. That interests me more. So I could write that as a poem. I could write that as the first line of a short, which is more usually at my speed, but I have been writing poetry. So, you get things like this. It's a wonderful gift for teachers. I think there's a discount for teachers. It's a wonderful gift for a young poet in your life. I know we're past Christmas, but I'm not selling this. I'm just, letting you know that it exists. It is wonderful, and Taylor's a wonderful poet if you ever want to read his stuff. Peggy DeBoer, wonderful poet. A lot of wonderful poets out there. So this is terrific. Heidi. Hi, Heidi. So books out of my ears. And what seems to be a common theme with the books that are coming into my life right now are the lives of writers. And the lives of writers and the writing life are something that... Hi, Annette. Can I post a link to the dice? Yeah, I will do that as soon as I get off this call. I will. I'll post a link to the dice. I'm on my phone right now, so. The dice are very fun, and I'm going to write about at midnight the truth is a wedding gown. That's just really evocative to me. Although as a writer, I can kind of hear his voice in the selections. So that's interesting too. And in the Slow Lightning group, occasionally we'll do a prompt from the metaphor dice. Although Peggy comes up with great independent prompts. If you are looking for prompts for, say if you're between stories or between books or whatever, and you feel like using a prompt, I always steer people to The Writer's Book of Days by Judy Reeves and The Writer's Idea book by Jack Heffron. Just has tons of prompts. Both of them have tons of prompts. Judy Reeves has like 365. So they are terrific. And then I use the prompts that I make up for my shorts, the word shorts. I just think of a bunch of words that can be either verbs or nouns. And I put them in a little coin purse, which of course you can't see what a mess my desk is right now, but if you could, you would understand why I'm having a little trouble finding it. Oh yeah, there it is. So I just take words that can be nouns or verbs, and put them in, type them up, and then cut them up into little shreds, and then put them in there, and then I can close my eyes and just pick one. So for instance, today I would pick, oh, thank you, Rosemary. Rosemary found the metaphor dice and put them up. Very cool. Thank you. Like for me, I just pulled up the word ball. So I would think of my associations with ball, like 8 of them. Ball, there's a sexual word. There's 2 of them that I can think of. For that, I can think of going to the ball. I can think of playing foursquare with those big rubber balls. I can think of a tennis ball. I can think of, Amelia Jacks has that ball. Used to play jacks a lot as a little kid. Very, very dexterous with that. Golf ball, there's a billion kinds of sports that use balls. Jai-alai, the first time I saw Jai-alai in Tijuana, I was like 10, and that really hard wooden ball, 180 miles an hour, That's the fastest game on earth. But there are other, mirror ball, disco, mirror ball. I can think of so many. And so then I look at my personal list, what resonates with me, of my list of 8 or 10 connotations of ball, or let's have a ball, and then I think of which one of that pulls me, which one is most evocative for me. And then that's the one that I'll write 2 pages double spaced using the word somewhere in there. This prompt, the metaphor dice, midnight, at midnight, the truth is a wedding gown. I just love that. So metaphor dice, that's a great prompt, whether you're writing fiction or poetry. Other things, I seem to, the lives of the writers seem to be a great gift item for Janet Fitch at this Christmas. So this was my assortment of writer biographies that people have been giving me. So we got Child of Light about Robert Stone, one of my very favorite writers and a huge influence on my work. So this is his biography. What a challenging life that guy lived. I am reading A Life of Montaigne, How to Live. Montaigne is my favorite philosopher because he's not abstract. I'm not an abstract thinker. I'm probably the biggest peasant you ever saw in your life. I don't understand abstraction, any abstractions. I'm just not good at it. Math was really hard on me, except for geometry, which made sense to me. Everything else, all the algebra and stuff was just like, solve for E. It's like, couldn't do it. I can't do philosophy that's logic-based. I don't follow it. But if it's anecdotal based, I can follow it. So I do well with, the ancient philosophers who just talked about life. And I do well with Montaigne, who just sat and thought about what it is to be a human being. He's in the 1500s in France, a time of bitter civil wars, a time of disillusionment, plague. The times never did settle out while he was alive. So he's lived through times very much like our own. And so if you're looking for a philosopher, if you're looking to get rid of self-help, pop, psych, all that stuff, and you want to read something a little bit more, interesting, a little more applicable, not a quick cure, but a thinking about life kind of thing. I recommend the essays of Montaigne. You can get a selected, so you're not looking at, a big book. You're looking at a little skinny book with some amazing things. And one of the best things about Montaigne is that he was all about self-acceptance. And if anybody knows me or has read, some of my stuff, you know that self-acceptance is really an important piece of becoming more human, more, you want to deepen your humanity. And by trying to rid yourself of flaws, it makes you very intolerant to the flaws of others, I've found. Whereas self-acceptance and acceptance of one's own flaws and one's own character, as an aperture, a way into the human condition, and for more compassion, more understanding, more compassion, more ability to absorb various flawed truths. It's important for deepening your humanity. And Montaigne was the first one who talked about that. He accepted his flaws. He wasn't always looking to be taller, richer, skinnier, getting rid of all the flaws of the personality. It reminded me a lot of the book How Proust Can Save Your Life by Alain de Botton, which is also how various philosophers' own lives affected their philosophy and what they're good for, like why read who for what. And Proust, that's Consolations of Philosophy. How Proust Can Save Your Life. I mean, Proust, and it will. If you read the book, you see how Proust's acceptance of his own life and flaws actually will save your life. It's about deepening your humanity. And boy, can we use that at the moment. So I got this, which is a Sarah Bakewell Life of Montaigne, which talks about how he came to be Montaigne, and how his philosophy, he never worried about being consistent. He often contradicted himself in that Whitman sense of, that you contain multitudes. So of course you're going to contradict yourself on a regular basis, because you're more than one facet of the crystal dish, so you're going to be reflecting all kinds of ideas, and some will contradict. I think it's some of the most interesting things about being a human being is that you're often in contradiction with yourself, and it's interesting to notice it. And it's kind of naive to believe that you shouldn't ever contradict yourself. It's naive. It shows a lack of self-understanding to believe that our activities should always be consistent. So, Marion saying editing shouldn't be about self-hate and perusing flaws, but giving more love to the work. Oh, is that beautiful? Thank you. And Grant Walter says, how about Job? Job had to learn self-acceptance. I believe so. So this is How to Live by Sarah Bakewell, A Life of Montaigne in One Question and 20 Attempts at an Answer. So that's beautiful. God, I'm really whipping through it too. Really enjoying that. And then, so we got Child of Light. My friend Boris at the Los Angeles Review of Books knew I would like this. Anton Chekhov, Life and Writings, Freedom from Violence and Lies. Anton Chekhov's Life and Writing. And his writing is very nonviolent. People don't punch it out. It's not Dostoevsky, and I always had trouble with Chekhov. I never, until recently, I just mystified by Chekhov. The quietness of it, the kind of melancholy acceptance of life was very upsetting to me as an American, And it's taken me, writing those Russian books helped a lot, because boy, my character, Marina M., was somebody who really believed in, it's a Russian philosophical trait in general, that the self-acceptance is essential, that you do have a nature, you do have a character, and that when you're fighting your own character all the time, that's when really bad stuff happens. And we know that, people who are always, they proclaim their goodness, they're the ones who are getting, the ones who really shouldn't be trusted. Oh, they're so good. Either they're not understanding their own nature, or they're just lying. And in either case, it's not good. So I really enjoyed George Saunders' Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which is about really takes apart 7 Russian short stories, and Chekhov had at least 2 of them, if not 3. So I got Freedom from Violence and Lives, Chekhov's Life and Writing. And the melancholy, it's a gentle melancholy, and, the way things happen in Chekhov is very interesting. It's always very subtle. And I'm not always the most subtle person, so it's good for me to have exposure to that. Next book I got was this is a California life of Czeslaw Milosz, who is, he was he was a Nobelist, I believe, eminent Polish poet, thinker and poet. And I didn't realize that he lived for, decades in Berkeley. He taught at Berkeley. He was there for 40 years. I don't know why people don't talk about him as a Californian, but evidently he was. And so this is a book about his life in California. And my husband gave me this because I'm about to take a short course, 6-week course at the Community of Writers where I teach, by the eminent poet Robert Haas, who is teaching a 6-week course in Milosz. So one of the great poets teaching a course about a great poet who he knew. So this is going to be amazing. So I wanted to read this to get ready for that. Other books that I got this. There's a Russian writer, Eugene Volodozhin. He wrote a book called Loris. I have a review online if you ever want to read it about Loris through the Los Angeles Review of Books. A stunning Russian writer. And he has a new book that's coming out. So I am super excited to read this. And I'm reading some poetry besides our poetry, Slow Lightning. Can't wait to read everybody's work in this. I'm reading Victoria Chang's Obit, which is just popping my head full of ideas about how to write. It's about personal loss and also loss of parts of yourself because of exterior losses. And that is wonderful. Hi, Peggy. I'm just eating it up, and it's inspiring me to write response poems to this, which is always a really good way to read. You notice if it's stimulating you to write. I've just finished Susan Straight's new book, Mecca, set in LA, set in the desert, which is it's the California that's not in, that's not the image that you get when you think of Southern California. It is the canyons of Orange County, where there's still a vaqueros living on old ranchos, and there's nurses working the night shift, and people living in Riverside, the butcher, and it's about the people who stay. I mean, Susan is a wonderful writer, and she's not as, the national conversation is usually about the people who leave. You leave home, you go to New York, you're the individual, the heroic individual who goes out and faces a new life and creates a new life for themselves, leaves home behind. And Susan isn't interested in that. She is very interested in the people who stay, in the communities that form and the people who comprise those communities. So it's about a group of guys who grew up together in Riverside, and women, their wives and friends. And when there's one character who leaves, who reinvents himself. He's a guy from Riverside, or where are they from? Maybe Indio, which is out in the desert, and not the Palm Springs-y glamorous desert, just, the real working people, who reinvents himself as a capoeira an Instagram influencer, that he's Brazilian and he's Ronaldo, and he moves to Venice Beach. He dumps his wife. He gets a new wife who fits in. She's an influencer too, and it's just like everybody from back then. He's basically written himself out of the story, which is the exact opposite of our national mythology, where we leave the people behind. This is a counter narrative where people who leave write themselves out of the story, and the story is the people who stay and the way they support each other through the slings and arrows of life. And there's a lot when you're poor, so it's about the survival of those people. And it is a really good book. So that's coming out in March. So keep your eye open for Mecca. That's very cool. And I just finished this book, which leads me into Louis' question, which is about short stories. And this is Maggie Brown and Others by Peter Orner. They're short stories. There's one novella, but aside from that, they're very short stories, like a page, 2 pages, 3 pages. So you're getting to see a lot of beginnings and endings. Some of them seem to be related in subject matter. Some of the characters overlap. But it's really helpful to start thinking about what is a short story. I was amazed by these stories, and I wrote all over it, which I think that one should. This is things like, here's a story, 1 page. That's 1 page story. So it reminded me of Lydia Davis in that sense. It's about, he found a strand of her hair in a book. And this is about that strand of hair and the book. And it's a story that's constructed to say one thing. Like he had one idea, one phrase, one sentence that he wanted to say. And he constructed a tiny story so that he could say that line. And it's just, it's fantastic. It's just a fantastic thing. And a story that short, these stories are amazingly short. And one thing about these stories is that it becomes very clear. So Louis, you were this is called Maggie Brown and Others by Peter Orner. And he taught at the Community of Writers the last time we had the community, the last year. He did the summer, taught at the summer workshop with me. And so I got to meet him, and he was pretty amazing. And this is short story writing at its most sophisticated. So it's all what you leave out. It's like it's like what you see in the flash of lightning, and then the light is gone. It's just in, out. It's kind of marvelous. I sometimes have trouble, because I'm such a peasant, sometimes have trouble with short stories when they're too abstract, when the ending isn't clear to me as a flat-footed peasant kind of person who's like, what was that? What was that all about? These contemplating what Peter Orner is doing in these stories, I begin to understand what the element. Louis asked, what are the elements of short story? And one of the definitions of short story that my ex-teacher, late teacher Kate Braverman suggested, who was a wonderful short story writer, O. Henry winner, is that a short story is often just the curtains open and you get a look at the mystery, and then the curtain closes again. And it's the feeling that it leaves you with that is its purpose. Was it Poe who said that, a short story should leave you with a singular effect? So when we're talking about what is a short story, I would say it's not so much it needs A, B, B. It's not cut and dried, because a short story is the most gossamer, the most ephemeral thing. And it's more, what do you choose to illuminate in that burst of lightning? I mean, there are short story writers who, of course, are a more old school, putting a fine, being very clear and open-handed about what they're doing. But a lot of them are magicians. And with magicians, of course, you have to watch very closely to what they're doing. You often have to go back and look at it again. And, how is this working? I write all over them. It's like, how is this working? How do they do it? Let's see if I can find you an example. Wow, a story constructed to say one thing. Here's one. It's like I'll take a line, I'll underline the line and say what he's doing. He needed a special code to work the elevator. So what needs a special code? You have to know the special code. And then there's dialogue that sort of needs a special code. And then, taking, how the good lines, and then where it takes a turn, and how it ends. It's a way of talking about a third person who's not in it. Here's a sad encounter story about memory, trying to remember the good. That I wrote all over that one. DNA, I usually write DNA when it's telling you something about itself that is kind of, it's the skeleton under the flesh of the story. I write DNA. So there's DNA. Here I write naive but real. He said he was thinking maybe pumpkins, about growing something. But mostly he wanted to watch stuff grow out of the ground. So that's a yearning for something real in these characters who are just having this kind of odd, it's like you have to know enough. Oh, that was something else I noticed about this story. It's called Montreal. And what I noticed is that you have to know enough about the story to start like this. In the spring, he and his wife drove up to Montreal and stayed in a little pension, etc. The short story has to get off the blocks in a way that a novel doesn't. The novel, is a large, compendious thing, so it has to have a good, solid porch and front door, and I think, a sense of the size of the house. Whereas a short story you just are dropped into it. So with short story, you watch for all the throat clearing, but a lot of the throat clearing has to do with you don't know where it's going to go, what it's going to be about. So you can't write a line like, the guy in the spring, he and his wife drove up to Montreal and stayed in the little pension and talked about their room at the top, accessible only by a ladder. He wanted to remember the 2 days they spent up there were calm, that it was truly an oasis, that the psychosis, paranoia, mania, which she's got, mental illness, had abated, and they were able to. Well, so he has to know all of that. He has to know the story before he writes the actual story. So, I don't know how he does it, if he writes the big story and who everybody is and stuff like that, and then throws that out and then begins in the most interesting place. It's very important to interact with your work and ask, how would you have to do that? To notice that the way he gets off the block so quickly, if he doesn't know the story, he wouldn't know where to start. He wouldn't know to have this couple driving into Montreal, because it starts so assuredly and so quickly. It's really good. So Louis says, I've often heard it said the main character must change, or the author needs to give a reason why she didn't change. These are stories that are just what you see in a bolt of lightning. So the change is probably usually kind of off the page. A lot of the stories are people who they're kind of in hardscrabble situations, and then there's a moment where they might have changed, and then they don't. That's what. So the change is more about our own hopes as readers that people can grow and change and, take control, and why they don't. I mean, that's about human sympathy. We talked about that earlier, compassion, being more human, that not every story is a story of success. And these more raw stories, not raw stylistically, but raw emotionally, people who are very vulnerable, and people who live in an unforgiving kind of world. People have put him in not only with Lydia Davis because of all the short, how short those stories are, but they also put him in with Carver for the people who are living under a weight of poverty, and their hopes are so small. The kind of future they can imagine for themselves is not very far. They don't allow themselves to get very far. So this is very much a short story like that. They really have to have a sense of where they're going, of what they believe about the world. The novella is related short stories and is much more warm and sentimental, but not in an obnoxious way. The others are pretty hardcore. What else do we have here? Grant says, speaking about home-based material, House of Breath by the Texan writer William Goyen. That's interesting. Russian friends always talk about Pushkin. Yeah, Pushkin is the Russians' Shakespeare. So everybody talks about Pushkin the way everybody in the West talks about Shakespeare. Has Pushkin surfaced much in Russian literary journal? Yeah, every Russian literary journey begins with Pushkin. Everything begins with Pushkin. Just like, in English literature, everything starts with Shakespeare. Let's see. What else we have here? Okay, good. So we're getting caught up. The notion of knowing the story before writing it, Annette says, speaks to the import of plotting versus pantsing. Yeah, all writing is pantsing. And then you plot. Short stories like Orner's are more like magic. They're like magic tricks. So you the magician loads himself up for a trick, wires himself up, and the cards go, here, and the trick is all set up before it's performed. So you do have to do that prep to get the magic. So that was Maggie Brown and others. Sweatpantsing. Ruthie says it's sweatpantsing. That's the after Christmas thing. Very good. And the other thing I'm doing is when I'm walking, I'm listening to Dune. I saw Dune, and Dune, the first part of Dune was made into a movie. If anybody's seen it, I really liked it. And but I'd never read it. And because I have so much to read, I also listen to audiobooks there's a library app called Libby on your phone. I don't know if people are aware of Libby, but you sign up through your local library, through your library card, and you can get all of these audiobooks for free. So I am listening to Dune right now as I am walking. I take a morning walk every morning, that it's not draining. And I am listening to Dune on my headphones. And it is so wonderful. I haven't enjoyed a book that much for such a long time. It's just a pleasure. Maybe it's a bag of Doritos, but not really, because I'm also learning things. I am going to be teaching a class in at the community of writers in point of view. I just taught a class in dialogue, and people have said, oh my God, point of view is so important when it comes to dialogue and when it comes to the voice of the book. I mean, the whole thing, point of view is character, right? And, strong, big aspect of character. And so I've become more attuned to point of view as I'm listening to or reading books right now, or poetry, and the point of view of Dune it's in authorial omniscient, which you don't get a lot of authorial omniscient anymore. It's very 19th century, where you dip into everybody's head, pass around the point of view. When I teach this, I usually use Anna Karenina, Tolstoy, 19th century, very beautifully, wonderfully done, omniscient, authorial omniscient. And because the 19th century believed in God. So the idea of a godlike point of view and then moving between people's consciousness, in the middle of a scene, not like close third. You'll have a scene that's in Pierre, and then you'll have a scene that's in, Cody, and you'll have a scene that's in, somebody else. Usually it's chapters when we do in a third person, close third. There'll be Jenny's chapter, and then Trudy's chapter, and Elaine May's chapter. But in omniscient, you move even in the middle of a scene from character to character, in and out, in and out. Focal length changes. You go in and you're so-and-so's mother, Paul's mother, and then you come out again and you're in Paul's point of view, and you're in the soldier's point of view. And I mean, Dune, Herbert really moves that point of view around. And so I know that when I'm teaching point of view, my next intensive, I'm already thinking about it. I'm going to I'll use Tolstoy and Dune, so that'll be a really nice, to see how point of view isn't limited to a type of book, a type of subject matter. You can use any point of view in any kind of material, except a high style historical. You have to be really good to be able to do first person historical and get the voice right, because first person is all about voice. But Dune, he does wonderfully, and he doesn't mess it up. When you're doing something like omniscient and you don't get it right, it's the reader stumbles. But I'm not stumbling over this at all. I'm finding this really good. So how Heidi asks, how much do you read a day? Do you schedule it? I'm working on balancing how much I read versus writing. Yes, I schedule it. I used to read first thing in the morning for 90 minutes, but I'm walking now in the morning and then I get to work. So I usually go in the afternoon. I read in the afternoon or in the evening, and I time myself. I read 90 minutes a day. And I time myself in 10-minute increments because it keeps me from wandering. Our attention is so, I mean, it's just shredded. It's like Swiss cheese because of all of the, because all of the uh, social media that we do. We just are being trained to break our attention. So I write down the page number where I start, page 87, and then I'll time 10 minutes. Little thing goes off, and I can kind of I can race against the clock a little bit to see, how many pages I get. Oh, 10 pages in 10 minutes. Okay. And then the next one I'll read and see. And generally that book then will be probably 10 pages in 10 minutes. So, but the timer keeps me reading. I don't think, oh, what happened to that on Facebook, or what happened to that on, it makes me concentrate and make sure, and then I can keep track, that I read for 45 minutes or, whatever, 60 minutes. I still owe myself another 30 minutes. So if I read, if I want to read 100 books a year, I have to read 2 books a week. And to do that, I'd have to read 90 minutes a day, or I'll never get through it. So that is a super helpful way to, because we buy books that excite us, right? Go to the bookstore and just, have you ever seen know anything about how people collect hashish? They put them in a suede suit, and then they run through the fields or walk through the fields. Probably run, huh? And then they scrape them down, and then they make blocks, and then that's your hashish. And I'm like that in a bookstore. They just fly off the shelves and stick to me. And then I have every surface is covered with books, and then books come in for, I hate to say anybody who has sent me a book to blurb. I'm sorry that I sometimes do blow those deadlines. I have so much to read. And I can't always read other people's stuff first. I generally tend to read the things that I need to read first. And then whatever time I have left, I'll read somebody else's stuff. The only way I can really make some progress through all those stacks is to read 90 minutes a day. But if you want to read less, if you want to read a book a week, maybe you'll only need to read 45 minutes a day. But just keep track, make sure. And then I do annotations. So I write in my journal about how that book is affecting my work. So I don't read just for numbers. I don't read a bunch of fast-moving, young adulty kind of things. I'm reading stuff sometimes. I only get 3 pages in 10 minutes because I'm working and I'm also writing in the margins. It doesn't matter. If I devote that kind of time every day, then I'll get through a lot of books, and a lot of interesting books, and you always need new ideas. You got to have new oxygen in the fish tank. You can't just run on, oh, I read books in college and I don't have to, now I just want to use that fuel and write off of that fuel. It's like, you have to stay alive mentally all your life and keep adding new ideas, new inspirations to the mix. just rereading the same books isn't going to be the same. So here's a... All right, so Grant said, would you mind commenting on Dr. O's Ragtime POV? God, I haven't read Ragtime in a long time. I can't do that without rereading it, just off the top of my head. I don't even know if it was omniscient or what, because I read it before I even started thinking about reading like a writer. I was just reading like somebody eating Doritos, just reading for entertainment. Instant gratification and stimulus have destroyed so many readers. Yeah, we have to we're all distracted, we have to note from Montaigne, you have to accept the flaws. We're living in our times, and we do social media, and we are distracted. So we find ways to do what we need to do. Some people, I don't know, I like reading in the morning, but I also like that morning meditation free write that Peggy Dobreer does. So I walk and then do that and then start work. So reading has to come later. Amazon gets most of my paycheck for books. Yeah, we try to be sparing on Amazon because it cuts out the writer. Basically, it cuts out the writer and the writer getting paid. Amazon just takes all the money, and they did nothing. So I use Amazon to do research, but I always buy through a real bookstore. Even if it's online, even if I buy, I have to buy a book online through a distant bookstore, I'd rather do that. So what are you using from the reading you do? What are you using? I'd have to look at my annotations. Let's see if I have any recently. What kind of things do I use? I'm going to see if anything pops out at me quickly. I just put them right into my journal, so I have to find them. Sometimes it's a thought that is inspiring to me. Sometimes it's a way of telling a story, like that Peter Orner, my thoughts about those Peter Orner stories. I find that inspiring, like, the flash of lightning type of short story. And pulling it apart, because sometimes I have like trouble with the New Yorker short stories, the type of stories they like. I'm just like, what the hell was that about? And have to go back through and see if I can tease out what kind of resonance, like, how am I even supposed to feel at the end of this? What was that all about? Sounds like you don't use ebooks. Yeah, I do use ebooks. I'm reading a book called Cultish on ebook, which is about the language of cult and cult-like groups, which is what we're hearing a lot of in the air right now, cult language. So I do use ebooks. I use everything. I also just finished essays by Lauren Hough, Hough. She had an article called, an essay called Cable Guy that was widely circulated. Really, this gay woman discharged who left from the Air Force, had been, just done all kinds of odd jobs, all kinds of struggles, grew up in a cult. Her working as a cable installer. It is such a wonderful essay. Look that one up, The Cable Guy. And this collection of her essays is called Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing, and they're wonderful. So I'm reading a little bit more nonfiction at the moment, but writers' lives, so tangential. Um, let's see. Grant asks, since you've talked about personal time allocated towards reading, would you mind sharing how many hours a day or pages a day you tend to write? Some days I'll write 6 pages. Some days I will just rewrite those 6 pages. So they're not 6 new pages, they're just rewritten. Because I write stuff and then I notice. I mean, this is my method. I write stuff and then I notice little, like the edge of a little magician's handkerchief sticking out. It's like, oh, there's some more there. There's more there. There's something that I've glossed over. Let's open that door and see what's in it. And then I'm always asking the question, what is this about? What is it about? Scene. Does something happen in this scene where the character cannot go back to the way it was before? Am I moving from place to place without having a scene? I have a character has a bunch of, she is about to do a job and needs various various tools and ingredients, and so she goes from place to place, but there's only one place in which she sees and thinks about stuff that relate to the bigger story. So I'm going to cut those other visits, those other shops. Maybe in that final shop she'll think of how she went to this and got paper, and this one got ink, and blah blah blah. But I will have it in the place where what happens relates to the larger story. So Marion asks, you're having a conversation with the reading and then you create from the conversation. No, usually I have I pull apart what I'm reading and write kind of what the writer's doing in the margins. In annotation, in my journal, I'll write what is exciting about it and how that's affecting my things that are gonna affect my writing, things that are exciting for me that they're doing. Because things I want to remember about how they did what they did that I'm responding to. So that's what I get out of those conversations. Lauren, Maxie says Lauren's book of essays is great. She reviewed it. Yeah, it's really great. So that's what I use about. Sometimes it's a tech. What do I use from the reading I do? Sometimes it's a technique. Sometimes it's just an observation that stimulates something in me. It's hard to know. It's like what excites you about a good conversation with a friend, when you want to write something down. Here's a question. I asked a question about your journal, Maxie asks. Is it just one? Separate journals for reading? No, it's just one. I have one journal. I have 2 journals. I have one journal at home, this one, and I put everything into it. These poems that I write in the morning, the slow lightning poems, I write that in the journal. I write the annotations in the journal. I write something that happened to me, somebody I saw, something I thought. Everything is in one place. So I can go through and see what I was thinking, what I was reading, what I do everything, but I tend to put my dreams in a separate journal because I want to know where I can find that dream. And then I have notebooks, writer's notebooks. So if I want to do the weather, I will put that in my ring binder of what the weather was at what time and what I'm seeing, smelling, hearing. The shapes and the thoughts will go into my writer's notebook. And that's something that I'll refer to over the years. So one journal. I'll show you what they look like on the shelf. Okay, now you're going to see the mess probably, but whatever. So I have a bookcase, and those are the journals. And the small ones are travel journals, and the big ones, the big black ones, are my everything else journals. And I tend not to like spirals because they hook onto each other and they tend to fall apart. I like a bound journal. So anyway, there's our Writing Wednesday. I am posting a lot of these Writing Wednesday videos onto my YouTube channel, so it's easier to find them. It's easier to look through. And if you go over, it's Janet Fitch's Writing Wednesday on YouTube. If you do it, subscribe, and you'll get notified when there's a new one posted. It's got about 100 of them. I mean, they're really, we've been doing this for a while. So Grant says, earlier you mentioned that in your personal writing projects dealing with Russia, you spent many hours digging through nonfiction materials here in the States as well as in St. Petersburg. Yeah, I was writing it here for 12 years. I was in St. Petersburg twice for, a couple of weeks. So it was mostly done here. I feel nonfiction material, documents, papers, etc. really ought to be read as well as fiction in one's journey. Oh, yeah. That's book-related research is very different than what I'm talking about this morning reading. That's part of the work of writing. So I consider that writing time, doing the research. I'm not, that's why it takes so long. Hey, Janine. So having a part-time job writing about neuroscientists and their work has inspired me to look at mine, Sonnets and Science. Very good. That's right. Knowing stuff is always good. Knowing something besides writing, is really important. So there's form and content, and you need both. Hi, Wendy. Good to see you. All right, well, have a good week, and we'll see you next week for Writing Wednesday. And if you want to check out Slow Lightning, the book, that's on Amazon. And if you want to actually do it, it is very cool. And it is, so contact Peggy Dobrer and adhocinc.com or adhocinc yahoo.com, and she'll give you a link. All right, so take it easy and have a happy new year.